And Barbara Boxer is in trouble. She's in trouble because there's been some pretty plain talk from people who have a pretty strong background in business. Carly Fiorina is one of those. She is a former chief executive of Hewlett Packard, and she seems to be making real inroads on a lead that seemed insurmountable. Carly Fiorina joins us right now on KOGO. Good morning, Carly. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to have you along, and you know, it's something that I think that the Democrats definitely did not see coming. What do you attribute your rise in the polls and I guess digging away at what many people said was an insurmountable difference between Boxer and Republicans and the rest of the candidates in the state?
Well, first, Barbara Boxer is extremely vulnerable because she's a failed senator. I mean, she's been the senator for California for 18 years. She was a congresswoman for 10 years before that. So 28 years she's been in Washington representing us, and she's failed to represent us. She's failed to lift a finger to turn the water back on in the Central and San Joaquin valleys. She's voted against virtually every free trade agreement that's come to the floor, despite the fact that, for example, the free trade agreement with South Korea would bring a lot of work to San Diego and L.A. She is in the hip pocket of unions and extreme environmentalists. She hasn't accomplished anything in her time. She's now pushing both card check and cap and trade, two business-killing job bills. I mean, she just doesn't get it.
Yeah, but that hasn't hurt her in the past.
Well, in the past, times were good. In the past, times were good.
Right.
Now, times are not so good. We're looking at the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. When the unemployment statistics came out last week, it's clear that California is suffering more deeply than other states in this nation, and that's not just because of an economic downturn. It's because of bad government policy. I think voters are very smart. They see what's happening here. More and more jobs are leaving this state because we have out-of-control government, out-of-control taxes, out-of-control regulation. And Barbara Boxer stands for all those things.
All right, Carly, let me ask you, though, one of the problems we have in this state and anywhere, and you know this in business from your past, and a lot of government people don't get this, even though they see the numbers right in front of them, we have to do something about the rampant pension programs. Here in San Diego, it's buried us. But across the state, you look at the problems we have. We are releasing inmates because we can't afford to keep them in prison because of the cost of guards. Correctional institutions themselves are just a small part of it. But that's one that really we've learned recently down here in San Diego, as I'm sure you're aware of. There's a lot of problems, and with unions and the strength they have. How are you going to make any difference? How are you going to change that dynamic?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. Unions now, for the first time in history, represent more public employees than private sector employees, which means that unions' political agenda is to grow government. Growing government is not good for growing the economy. We know that. We see it every day. The federal government, however, specifically the U.S. Senate, has a great deal to do with what goes on in California. For example, it is the federal government's job to secure the border. We're not doing that. For example, it is the federal government's job to administer the Endangered Species Act, which has spawned a whole thicket of regulation in California that's killing jobs. For example, it is the federal government's job, specifically the U.S. Senate, to determine tax rates. And by the way, while our taxes continue to go up and up, California now only gets 78 cents for every dollar of federal tax money we send to Washington. When Barbara Boxer first went to office, it was 93 cents.
Well, but here, I guess my question for you is how most people really don't understand the oppressive nature of government. They just don't see it because obviously if they're of that political ilk, then they see it as something that provides jobs and provides stability and what have you. How do you convince Californians to change that mindset?
Well, I think one of the things that Californians realize, this shows up in the polls, I hear it everywhere I go in California. Californians are looking at what's happening here. So what do we have here? We have government that's gotten bigger, taxes have gotten higher, regulations have gotten thicker, and jobs are leaving at an accelerating pace. We're now losing literally more jobs out of the state. And then Californians look around and they see Nevada fighting for our jobs, Texas fighting for our jobs, North Carolina fighting for our jobs, but also Mexico and Guatemala and Brazil and India and China. All these places fight for our jobs. We have to start fighting for our jobs.
We also, you mentioned the federal government, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that we have a flood of illegal immigration into the state. We have legal immigrants that have taken their businesses and getting out. And we have just a seemingly uncontrollable, because it's the federal government's job to do it. We can't stop them. We can't even arrest them. Hell, half the cities in the state seem like they're sanctuary cities. That's a big task you have in front of you.
Well, exactly. California, of course, has its own issues that have to be solved in Sacramento, but California cannot get healthy without a good partner in the U.S. Senate, because it is the federal government's responsibility to close the border. It is the number one priority of federal government to secure the nation, to protect the nation. You can't protect the nation if you can't protect the borders. It's also, I believe, government's job to stop destroying jobs and start helping creating jobs. That's why the issue of taxation is so important. You know, it's one thing to say we need to grow jobs. It's another thing to say, as Barbara Boxer does, and frankly one of my primary opponents, Tom Campbell, does as well, say, oh, yeah, we want to fight for jobs, but by the way, we also want to raise taxes. We now have the highest taxes in the world on businesses. Small businesses are drowning. Regulation and taxation.
We just recently attacked 1/6 of our economy with a health care bill that the president's due to sign in the next half hour. As a U.S. Senator, how would you approach future legislation that would hopefully diminish some of the power and impact this bill has on Americans?
Well, you know, yesterday I signed a pledge that I would work to repeal this legislation. And let me be really clear that I believe health care reform is necessary. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I have become an involuntary expert on what's wrong with the system, but also what's right with the system. The problem with this bill, the reason I believe it must be repealed, is because it doesn't accomplish any of the goals that it set out to accomplish. Goal number one was to lower the cost of health care. And the Congressional Budget Office says that we will increase the cost of health insurance. We will increase the cost of health care because in this bill are a whole series of taxes that are being loaded on top of health care and health insurance providers. We're increasing the taxes on small business owners. I keep talking about small business because it's small business that creates 2/3 of the new jobs, that employs half the people. We are killing these businesses with taxes, and we've just increased that tax burden.
Well, I think...
Go ahead.
No, we're out of time here, and I would love to have you on more, and I hope you consider this an open door, because we do want to hear from all candidates. I just hope that, honestly, that when you get there, and that should you defeat Boxer in this election, that you approach your 6 years like it's the only term you're ever going to do, because we need that kind of approach in the Senate. Take no prisoners approach to the problems that we have in this state, both fiscally and socially. And you know, obviously, we're one of the biggest economies in the world.
Well, I totally agree with you. We have to cut federal spending. We have to cut federal bureaucracy. We've got to get taxes under control. We have to start fighting for every job. You know, I'm not going to Washington forever. My husband reminds me of that every day. But I am going to Washington to make a difference, and as the only person in this race who's ever created a job. By the way, I started as a secretary. I know how hard it is, and I started in a small business. But as the only person who's created a job, I think I really do understand what it is government does to destroy jobs in this state and in this country, and we have to turn it around.
Well, Carly, we will link your website at KOGO.com, CarlyFiorina.com, and hope to talk to you again soon, okay?
Great. It's CarlyForCalifornia.com. Thanks so much for having me.
That's easier. All right. Thank you, Carly. See you.